Welcome to Preparing for AI, the four dimensions of governance. I'm Paulo Robles. I'm the technical director for VEscape Labs, and I'll be your host today. We're thrilled to have you because governance is not one thing that everybody has in mind. Is most of the time is overlooked, and it is important, really important for an AI implementation success. You can have the best data, you can have the best tools, you have the smartest models out there, but without governance, it's like flying without navigation system. So I'm joined today by Damon. Damon Quimby is a part of our partner of us, TD SYNNEX, and he's a specialist in governance and AI strategy. And Damon brings a deep experience in helping organizations define AI policies, align ethics, technology, and build trust into their AI systems from day one. A little bit of housekeeping today. So we're going to be here for about 45 minutes. Feel free to pose your questions in the chat at any time, and me and my team are going to be responding those live. The sessions will be recorded, so you'll receive a copy of the session after we're done, and we'll keep an eye on the chat because we might share some additional material with you. The agenda today it's pretty simple. Yes, we're going to talk about why governance matters, what are the four dimensions of governance as VEscape Labs sees it, some real-world governance AI examples, a little bit of a discussion between Damon and myself, talking about how, why, and where it's important, and a little bit of a roadmap from principles to practice. We're going to share a few tools and templates that we prepare for you guys to take a look, and feel free to fill out and assess your governance with it. So without further ado, let me introduce myself. As I said, I'm a technical director for VEscape Labs. I've been in the industry for over 25 years. And recently, in the past 10 years, I've been focusing not only on technical implementations for cloud development and data, but also in AI. So we have an end-to-end experience implementing, helping clients implement their AI adoption. With me is Damon Quimby. Please, Damon, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, glad to be here, Paulo. Yeah, as you mentioned, the title of my role is actually solutions architect, but I do specialize in AI governance, and it's the goal of making your AI initiatives responsible, transparent, and explainable, right? So that it's something that your own company and your customers or your clients can trust. We want to make it trustworthy, right?
That's
So
good.
so I'm pretty passionate about that.
Thank you, and thank you for joining. It's
Absolutely.
appreciated. So let's jump right in. So one question that most of my clients ask is, but why should we bother about governance? What's the big deal about governance? And I use some examples around from past experience. And one example that comes to mind is um, if you have an AI project, but nobody is accountable for what it should do. Nobody has a responsibility to measure its outcome. That's one way to govern it. If there's no clear accountability, there's no insurance of the outcome of that AI implementation. For sure, policies it's important. Having a structure within your AI project that then evolve to siloed or whatever capability gaps that you may have or compliance gaps that you may have. If there's no policy around your AI, it's also a problem. So it's not only one recommendation that we make to our clients, but they need to think about it with the mindset of oversight, with the mindset of making sure that it is sustainable and trustworthy. And think about governance as a safety net that lets you innovate with confidence and defines and it helps you define how it should work and how it should look like. So everybody who adopts it takes care of that particular governance or transparency or framework or even oversight and accountability, right? So in a past experience, I worked with a financial institution who used an AI to create a credit score, and based on that credit score, it gave you a recommendation. And the model was working well until they unintentionally um, gave this advantage to applicants for certain zip codes. There was no formal review process of the outcome, so the issue went unnoticed for several weeks. And once we were talking about adoption and how many clients they were gathering from that AI implementation, we noticed that the issue. So we proposed to implement governance to review the data they were getting back and the response from the clients by using it. And with those data audits and fairness checks, we tweak the model, and the system then become more accurate and more compliant to those zip codes that were mistreated. So, in your experience, Damon, what's the biggest misconception in regards of governance within an enterprise?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest misconception is that you know, it's not required, right? We don't have to have it, right?
Hmm.
It's a luxury.
Yeah.
Is a lot of people, think of it that way. They think, well, that would be nice to have, but I mean, we
Do we
we
need
got
it
to
for
wrap
it
our
to
head.
work? Yeah.
Yeah, we got to wrap our heads around AI first, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But so that's a big misconception. The other one is that it's only, really only the big companies need it. We're small, we're not at that level yet. But that's not the case, really. If any organization or any enterprise that's using AI needs governance. They need to govern it because it's, I almost like to think of it like it's an organic thing. It changes over time, and so whether they're using it, for, like you mentioned, a bank for credit scoring or patient diagnosis or customer insights or some sort of customer service application or supply chain optimization is another big one. They all need it, because when it comes to AI, there's three pretty specific kinds of risk involved.
Hmm.
There's reputational risk, right? And what is your reputation? That's your brand. I
Yeah.
mean, whose brand isn't important to them? It's critical. And now in the economic climate today, having a good brand is everything,
Yeah.
right?
For sure.
So, then there's uh, regulatory risk. I mean, you want to be in compliance with the law, right? You don't want to be incurring fines and things like that. And
Mhm.
while I'm on that just for a second, a lot of folks think, well, I don't need to worry about, let's say, the GDPR, for instance. Because I only do business here, or we're located here in the U.S.
Mhm.
But if you have customers or that are doing business in Europe, or they're shipping stuff to Europe, then it still applies. You still have to consider that in your AI strategy.
Yeah,
And
for
then,
sure.
another one is operational risks. Like I liked you mentioned a financial institution. I mean, a great example of an operational risk is like you said, like a bank. If a lot of them use AI to approve and deny loans, right? So think about that. Okay, if the model sort of develops some drift, over time, some drift can come into the model, or maybe some PII starts to leak out or what have you. So now let's say you're uh, your application is now approving loans that it shouldn't,
Yeah.
right? That's a huge risk. What's the flip
Or
side of that?
denying. Yeah.
Maybe it's denying loans that it should be approving. Now you're missing out on business. So see how both of those outcomes are bad,
More bad.
right? They're
Yeah,
negative, right? So yeah, so if without governance, you're open to that risk. So
I agree. I couldn't
yeah,
agree more. And one thing that I've seen the most is we deal with it later.
yeah,
When you say you would deal with it later, or that's tomorrow's problem, or once we have a requirement from the government, then we will implement um, frameworks or transparency or whatever the problem may be or the requirement may be. Uh, once you do that and you start operating, it's like having a backlog of issues that you said, well, right now it's working, but tomorrow we will fix it tomorrow. And then the months go by, and you enhance your AI, you enhance it with maybe agentic, and now the problem is replicated throughout your agents, throughout your AI implementation, and the problem is going to be more expensive to fix.
yeah,
I see this as must have at the beginning of your implementation because you can implement the controls that you need, the guardrails, if you will. So once you scale your AI implementation, it doesn't replicate the same problems along the way.
yeah, yeah. I like to illustrate it this way. A lot of companies, they approach AI like a teenager getting their first car, right? They're all
Mm,
excited.
mm,
I can go anywhere now. What does
mhm.
that teenager not want to think about? I got to pay for car
Yes.
insurance now.
Yeah,
Right?
insurance.
Well,
Yeah.
as a corporation or an institution, or an organization of some gravity, you can't think of it that way because you're
Mm,
opening yourself up to all of these risks that we mentioned.
yeah,
So
for
yeah.
sure. For sure. Yeah, that's a great insight. So I would like to talk about the four dimensions. We call it four dimensions in AI's governance. And the first one is compliance. If you, or the question that you should ask yourself as a company is my AI initiative aligned with regulations, with data privacy, and with internal standards? So the first thing is policy and compliance. If you want to define a good AI implementation practice, you need to have this question answered sooner rather than later. As I said before, that it doesn't matter what how big or small your AI implementation is. If you don't implement policy and compliance, when you scale up, it's going to be a pain to fix it and to go back to the basics in this realm. The next one will be accountability. Do you know who owns the outcome? Do you know who defines the roles and responsibilities? Do you know who needs to take account of the metrics? What's the outcome? What's the result? Did you get what you wanted? So if you don't have accountability on who's owner of that part of the implementation, uh, then you can implement whatever AI you want, but you don't know what's doing. You don't know what the outcome is. In terms of um, in terms of oversight, I like to also add here ethics and trust. So governance should ensure that the decisions that AI is making are aligned with human values. That it's fair, it's transparent, it's inclusive. It's making an AI explainable to ensure bias towards anyone who's leveraging your AI implementation. So it should be part of your project, having transparency, ethics, and trust. And finally, um, AI is not something that you just set and forget. So you need to continuous monitoring your implementation with the governance as a premise. So you can still see if your models changes, then you may have to change your governance in compliance or in oversight or maybe in transparency. So there's a way to go about an AI in terms of governance where you contain whatever negative outcome could be. And if your AI keeps evolving, your implementation keeps getting better or more models to interact with, then your governance should go align with those new models, so you don't step yourself while you walk. So, Damon, when you help clients put these dimensions that I mentioned or some form of these dimensions in place, where do you usually start?
Yeah, that's a great question, Paulo. I think a good way to put it is start where the risk is highest, right?
Hmm.
So, because a lot of companies, their first steps with AI is going to be what? It's probably going to be a chat bot, and it might be internal, right, to their organization. So they figure, well, it's just our own employees that are going to be using this. We don't really need governance on that, or they might not even be thinking about governance at all yet, right? But if they're outward facing, they're facing the public or even a set of clients, then yeah, you have to have ethical standards in place. You need to really have clearly defined, principles and policies for uh, responsible use of that AI application,
Yeah.
right? And then of course, you'll build your governance structures around that, right? So the foundation is really it's almost like a mindset, as opposed to, it's not about the technology, the hardware, software itself, right? It's
Hmm.
about sort of the mindset of your organization. So it
Hmm.
should be that organization's values and their ethics. And I mean, I hate to use the word morals, even, to a large degree. And then it's got to be their tolerance for risk, right?
Hmm.
Some are more risk averse than others. And a lot
Hmm.
of times that depends on how regulated the industry is that they're in, or what have you, or how public facing it is, or
Yeah.
isn't.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, accountability. You don't want your AI to be a black box, right?
Correct.
So people, give it some kind of input, and then no one has a clue how it's arriving at the output it's giving you, right? That's not what you want. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Especially if you don't know what it's doing, that's where rumors of a machine rising is come from, right? Because nobody knows what it does.
Exactly. Yeah. Couldn't agree
I
more.
agree with you.
Yeah.
Um, Now, I would like to open the floor for a little bit of a back and forth here on examples. Um, so I'm pretty sure that you work with different organizations of different maturity levels, and you've seen all types of examples of good or bad governance. Can you give me a couple, one of a good implementation and one with a bad implementation of governance?
I thought about this, and I was thinking, um, I mean, in my mindset is that any governance is good governance
Hmm.
because it's better than no governance,
Yeah, for
which
sure.
is which is what we're still seeing. We're still seeing companies not implementing a governance platform of any kind,
Hmm.
or maybe they just have sort of a like a homegrown sort of hit and miss. Well, we run some tests every now and again, and that type of thing.
Hmm.
So I would say that would be an example of governance not done right. If there's no governance, or if it is just there's no real framework, there's no like continuity to it, and it's just, and you don't want it to be like I said, you don't want it to be just like a hit and miss.
Yeah.
We test this once in a while, and I think that code's running on a machine over there in
Hmm.
Houston. I mean, that's what we don't want, right? So I mean, the opposite, we kind of discussed, clearly defined policies and a clearly defined framework. I mean, we sort of the way we um, define governance is, we say that it's it's the process of directing, monitoring, and managing holistically all
Yeah.
of the AI activities in an organization or enterprise.
Yeah.
And so if a company is really doing that, then that's AI governance. It's not just, well, this one department over here is using 4 or 5 different models. We don't know what the rest of the company is doing. That's not governance.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
That's like that's a silo, right?
Yeah.
That's you have a siloed, AI, initiative over there, and then the rest, who knows what the rest of the organization is doing, So that's another thing we don't want to see. We don't want to
Yeah.
see that. So
And talking about silos, I helped a client a few months back who was pretty much siloed. They had their DevOps teams totally isolated from the development teams. They had their QA teams just with a sign, "Don't bother until you have code completed to test." And they wanted to implement an AI for their helping developers to accelerate their delivery. One for creating infrastructure as a code on demand through a chatbot, and the other one for QA to accelerate their test automation. But as they were silos, you had to go in and investigate, right? Which department had what, and while we were investigating, we noticed that the DevOps were really diligent, were with their security, with their naming conventions, with the way that they created templates for Terraform, the way they administrate their cloud infrastructure. It was really well structured. Then the test team had a pretty good handle of how to test things, how to automate the test for those things that we're testing for. Um, but they had no documentation. They had no repository of how to do X, Y, Z. They knew how to do it, but it was all in their brains. And on the development side, they were really strict with peer reviewing, but there was no evidence of that being done. So it was a challenge because we had to convince all three departments that the governance should include all of them. And it was shocking to me knowing that um, a DevOps team should be that glue between all three teams. And they were great on their own, but they were not great as a group. So the governance that we put in place there was establish a council where a lead from the QA, a lead from the DevOps, and a lead from testing will come together, discuss how to implement the triggers for each one of those departments, who should be responsible of the outcome, and a third party that was going to oversee that the actual outcome was what it was requested for from the AI. So they started working together, and at the end of the project, we noticed that their performance in delivery, because they were working as a group now, was from 1 to 60%. I mean, they grew from 1 to 60% performance improvement without the AI. They haven't implemented the AI yet. So the problem they had was not that they didn't have a tool to help them implement fast development or fast testing or infrastructure as code through a chatbot. It was they were not talking between them. They were not coordinating work. So when the AI came in, they rapidly went to 100 within a month. So it's the governance will open those channels from my perspective, where okay, we want to implement this part of the AI for infrastructure as code. Great. What does this code is going to live on? Well, it's going to live on this service, this service, this service, and it's going to need this connection, and it's going to need these ports open. Okay, that information comes from the dev team, not from the DevOps team. Okay, so now we have a communication channel and a document that represents that step by step. So that's the way that we help them accelerate their adoption. And In the meantime, we help them build a stronger team by open those channels of communications to governance.
Yeah, that's a great methodology. Really, really good organization there that you've outlined there. Part of my background, was a briefly I was sold commercial insurance, and so I understood, the risks, risk management, and one of our sayings in that industry is if it isn't documented, it didn't happen.
Correct.
So without documentation, it's all the testing is kind of moot, isn't it? I mean,
Mhm.
if they don't document it, right?
Mhm.
Because if something does occur, there's nothing to refer to. Well, wasn't that tested? Well, yeah, we tested it. Such and
Mhm.
such. Well,
Where's the
where's that
evidence?
documentation?
Yeah.
No, right? So yeah, you've outlined a great methodology there. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's one of my passions. In my previous life, I was a DevOps engineer a few years back, maybe a decade back or more. So one of my uh, biggest challenges was to make every department talk to each other, and sometimes developers are hesitant because it's just the QA always rejects my commit. Yeah, but this is the reason why, and so DevOps, from my point of view, and bringing it to AI, um, it's a culture, and governance is a culture.
Yeah.
Just like you said,
Yeah.
DevOps is a culture. It's not the tools. It's not the automation. It's not canary deployments.
Right.
That's an aid to your teams. The
Yeah.
same ways, the same way that I see governance, right? And to be able to say that you have governance, you mentioned a couple of times. If you have it, that's a win, and I agree. But when you see governance implemented poorly, you can see a siloed teams. You have governance for DevOps, you have governance for testing, and you have governance for dev. But they don't talk to each other, so they could step each other's toes because they don't communicate it. That you know what? Before you send me code to test, you need to give me what to test. I mean, a guideline of what I need to test. Because if you just send me the code, I don't know what it should do. I'm not the owner of the story, right? The same way that DevOps operates, right? If you ask a DevOps to deploy, yeah, I can deploy, but what services do you need? The same goes with governance. If one governance says you can only commit a code to test with this description of what it needs to be tested, then the next department knows what to do, and that's the governance that I'm trying to relay here on the first maturity level. If you have a siloed governance, yes, you have governance, but you need to define those practices across your organization and communicate those accountability and observability and all of those points that we already discussed across your organization, so everybody knows what's the right way to do it, how to avoid problems. Now, once you have that step done, then you can start thinking, okay, I need to connect those dots. I need to have discussions between the leaders of each of my of those parties involved in this AI implementation, and then implement oversight, so we know that everybody is doing what they have to, and the AI is responding how it needs to. Once you have that, then you have a trusted governance. Then you start documenting everything to the detail. You start reviewing the biases, the fairness, the compliance, the decisions that AI is giving you are right decisions, are the correct answers to the questions that you're posting. And you have a clear path, a defined path for escalation. If something breaks, you know who to talk to. You know who can tweak the model. You know who needs to review the data that's coming out. You know who is responsible for advertising the changes that your AI implementation is getting to. And then you go to strategic. The strategic is more how can I scale my implementation. So once you have governance embedded in your practice, in your AI practice, and for all practices for that matter, once you have that implemented, then it's a piece of cake to replicate to the next project and the next project. And you can continue monitoring all of them. You ensure that it's explainable and it is in compliance. And then leadership uses that governance insight to think about, okay, what's the next risk that we can take in innovation. So I think that the governance stages are the maturity stages from my perspective is how can I keep growing? Yes, if you have governance, that's a win, but you never stop learning, right? Just like people. We start by sitting, then we crawl, then we walk. One day we jump in a plane and fly. And but at the end of the day, you start growing, you start learning from day one. And so the same goes from my in my mindset. The maturity stages are in that way. So yes, you have governance, great. Is your governance talking to each other? Yes. Okay. Perfect. Now you have a symbiosis between your teams, and everybody knows what's the right way to do it. Does that generate trust? Well, no, because even though we have governance, we don't have documentation. Oh, well, that's a problem because
Yeah.
anything that's not documented, you cannot be trust. So that's the way I see it. So we were discussing a few minutes ago about before the call. About governance. So what you're thinking about a maturity stage?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Looking at this slide, I couldn't agree more. Especially like on the siloed, you've got like at the bottom there, governance occurs reactively.
Correct.
After something happens. I mean, that's that's the horse is out of the barn. We don't want to wait until there's a complaint, right? Or
Mhm.
a customer complaint, or even worse, like a lawsuit,
Yeah.
or the name of your company ends up in the headlines in some way, right? We all remember those headlines when AI first was gaining some traction, in
Yeah.
the world. So I couldn't agree more with that. You've got to have accountability, those defined policies. The second one there about where the communication comes in. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, and you got initial alignment between business and tech leaders, because if you think about it, every AI initiative has multiple stakeholders,
Yeah.
right? It's not just the development team who's be like, yes, they're using our work. It's what is the business need that AI is solving, right? Well, that business is run by a team, or that arm of the business, right, is run by, those are stakeholders in how well that AI works, right?
Mhm.
And then think about you have a legal team. They're huge stakeholders in how the AI is working, or to keep the organization out of legal trouble.
Mhm.
And then so you have multiple stakeholders. So if you can have that, like you said, that alignment that you see in the second column there, I mean, ideally, if that was automated, that's that's beautiful. That's
Yeah.
what you really want,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
that
Correct.
testing is done and the evaluations get automatically sent out to be signed off, and I know you know how to do that. So so that's why we're here, right?
Yeah.
But then and then again, the third one there, you've got trust. Trusted, the policies are documented and enforced. The models are reviewed. I mean, you've got to have you want to be able to look at the entire life cycle of that model,
Mhm.
right? You've got to see where changes were made, what data was used, what happened here, what happened if something does happen. We hate to bring it up, but if something does happen, you got to be able to trace it back right to
What and where, when.
What happened there?
Mhm.
Yeah, why did that happen? And
Mhm.
then and then your team can mitigate that. If there needs to be more training on that model, or maybe you want to abandon that model and just start with you see how fast they're coming out now, right?
Mhm.
There's new models like daily.
Daily, yeah,
So you might say, we need to just abandon the use of that one and start with another one, testing another one.
yeah,
And then your last column there, governance is embedded in every AI initiative. Yes, if you don't really have governance if it's not holistic. If you're using, like we said before, if you're using some AI over here there's no governance on that AI, then you don't really have governance,
yeah,
right? You're still open on that side. You're open to whatever risks are
yeah.
associated with that usage there. So
Mhm.
continuous monitoring, absolutely, they have to be monitored because, like we said before, models drift over time. PII can creep in. Regulations can change. Well, this was legal today, but tomorrow it's illegal, or so.
Yeah,
So you have to stay on top of that.
yeah,
And
right.
then leadership. Yeah, leadership they're going to have to sign off, right? They're going to have to sign off that we'll take responsibility. This is safe, and so yeah, this is you've got a great framework outlined here.
Thank you. Yeah,
I couldn't
and
agree more.
and I think that one thing that I often see uh, is a leadership saying we're going to have an AI to help our clients adopt our new product, and that's the premise that gets to the development team. And the development team doesn't have the tools um, to implement the AI. For example, they are limited on their knowledge on AI, so they got the request and they started building it, and then the leadership comes back and say, "Where's my AI?" Well, here it is. And then, okay, let's run it. And when it runs, it breaks something with the trust with the clients because it does something that was not governed. Let's say, for example, the example that I made earlier about the financial institution, it starts negating access to a segment of your clientele because it lives in a zip code. So those problems, if those problems become, well, not become, come from a siloed implementation without oversight from anyone. An instruction came in, but no guidelines were put in, no rail guards were put in. So I think the governance maturity, it's not essential that you look at the maturity stage, but it's great if you do because it's gonna ease your life a lot.
Yeah, yeah. To that point, that last statement you made, it's gonna make your life easier, right?
Mhm.
There's another saying that that trust is gained in drops and lost by the bucket,
By the bucket.
right? So if you lose the trust of your clients, your customers, or even your own people, your own internal,
Yeah,
your own organization, it takes so long to gain that back. So
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
I
couldn't
agree.
agree more.
I would like to talk about how to get from principle to practice. So I think that the roadmap is pretty simple. Define policies, assign who owns it, keep an eye on it, and improve it. So I think that those four steps are simple enough or self-explanatory enough that we can you know what, okay, this is how what you do. Let's go. Let's move forward. But I would like to discuss with you, what does this mean? Uh, Define policy could take a long time. Could take weeks or months, depending on the size of your implementation or how you want to start. So I always recommend to define policies as MVPs, like minimal viable products.
Yeah.
So you don't need to do a big bang to define policies. You can implement one, analyze it, see who is responsible for it, monitor it and audit it, and then improve upon it. Once you're done with the first, then you can implement the second. And this is a step-by-step cycle sprint based, if you will, um, implementation. So once you have enough policies in place that are governed and improved by on a daily basis or on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis, then you have a strong foundation. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. This is a great sort of step by step, like you said, principles to practice. Uh, yeah, I think the first one there with defining policies, that's almost, that's almost a corporate culture
Mm-hmm.
statement in a way. Every organization has to define for themselves what responsible, let's quote, responsible AI means for them,
Mm-hmm.
right? For
Mm-hmm.
that organization, that institution. What does that mean? Especially with regard to, like you said, fairness, right? Transparency, accountability, privacy, right? And then who's going to oversee that, right? So that's got to be established probably first, right? From the principle of that, and then you also have to identify where the AI is going to be used, and then assess those risks based on like bias and explainability, regulatory exposure, and then create those policies, and they need to be clearly set policies
Yeah.
for development and deployment. uh, you have to have those approval processes. The testing will occur. You got to have a process in place for approval, right? It's got to go to the legal team or HR team, or
Mm-hmm.
who would have to sign off, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
someone's got to take responsibility, right? Right. So you got to establish that, though, right? And then an escalation path too, should something arise. So, and like we said before, ideally to have that all automated is the best.
Yeah.
And we can certainly help companies do that. And I know you can too. So then the third one there, let's see, govern and improve. Yeah, I mean, it has to be holistic.
Yeah.
It has to be across the board for your organization.
Yeah. I agree.
So you can't just say, well, we're going to worry about the external facing AI, but not the internal. You can't.
Yeah.
That's not that's not the way. That's not really governance then.
Yeah.
So I think another thing I'm just going to bring up is because it's kind of a new sort of threat, if you will, that we're seeing is this shadow AI. And it's
Mm.
kind of like it's kind of what we're just talking about. If you're not governing all of it, you don't really have governance, right?
Yeah.
And shadow AI is kind of a thing. It's where employees are using, they're doing stuff on the side with other AI tools that aren't sort of sanctioned by that organization. Like, IT didn't approve that, so you shouldn't be using that, right? So
Yeah.
you've got to have a methodology for finding that, right? So
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
yeah.
I know a couple of examples for that, and the troubles they got into by using a non-sanction AI, especially when using company data.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's one of the problems that AI doesn't. I want to phrase this correctly, but if you use let's talk about chatbots, for example, ChatGPT or Gemini, or uh, those that everybody can use for free, Grok.
Mm,
Um, if you use one of those, um, and you take the company's information into them, even though they say they don't use it for training other users' behavior,
mm-hmm.
you don't know where that data is going because it's a
Exactly.
closed box.
Right.
And that's where I lean a little bit more towards the enterprise AIs for work. So in one example that I love is watsonx, right? watsonx, it's dedicated to you leveraging your data that's never going to leave your environment. So that's one thing that, and you can do the same with others. You can go to OpenAI, buy your own implementation, and do the same thing. Although those were not thought of enterprise. The initial thought of those were not enterprise. As of today, and actually I saw an interview yesterday about it. Um, they keep promising results on the enterprise level, return of investment on the enterprise level, but they haven't figured out how to work as watsonx does.
Yeah.
So those are the things that, if you don't govern it, you put your company at risk, uh, because you could be leaking information out to the world.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
So we prepared a few documents for our audience. One is the AI readiness self-assessment. It covers topics from data, talent, and all the way to governance, and even if you're planning on agentic, a little bit of questions around agentic. So this is something that our audience can fill out and assess where they are on their maturity, on their readiness. And one thing that we always recommend to our clients is, let's do a use case prioritization. Once you have that identified, then you can start thinking about how to govern it. Once you have that in place, you can think about, okay, what do we need to organize in data, or do we need training for talent? So we have these two documents that we're going to share at the end of the presentation, and I would love to have a response from the audience on what they think about governance. I would love to hear back from them about problems they may have implementing governance, or because they didn't implement any governance. So with that, I would love to thank you, Damon. Thank you, Damon, for coming in today. I really appreciate your input. I mean, you've been one of the experts on the field. I really appreciate your input, and thank you for your time. And
Absolutely. You're welcome. My pleasure.
thank you so much. And for our audience, what's next for you? Well, you can act now. Just take that AI readiness assessment, identify where you are. If you're planning on implementing AI, don't hesitate to contact us. We can facilitate a readiness workshop. We can work with you on prioritizing your use cases, and then we can start building an AI within governance for you. So thank you so much for your attendance. Again, Damon, a pleasure as always. And come back next time when we get a new view of AI. Are you ready for it? Bye.